Hey folks, in this interview, we're going to talk about the power of personal projects and specifically the Weekly 50. This is TWiP. Hey, welcome back to another episode of This Week in Photo. I'm your host, Frederick Van Johnson. In this show, we're going to be talking about the power of personal projects. Specifically, Simon Ringsmuth. He's a photographer that's going to be talking to us about how he gave himself a project and has been running with it for the last several years, and how it has impacted his photography, as well as the impetus of him putting that self-imposed project together. So Simon, welcome to This Week in Photo, man. How are you doing?
Hey, Frederick, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me here. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, you're welcome. You're welcome. I'm excited to talk about this. For a couple of reasons. The idea of doing sort of a project that is is sort of an ongoing project that doesn't necessarily have an end in sight. Like, I did an interview with Julianne Costa a couple days ago from Adobe, and her idea of personal projects is more from the standpoint of a small, concise body of work that has a finite beginning and finite ending, or a definitive beginning and ending, versus the ongoing projects like the one we're going to talk about today with your Weekly 50 project. So I'm really excited to talk about this and get your perspective from it. Before we do that, tell us about Simon. Who is Simon? And what's your elevator pitch, your cocktail party, what do you do spiel?
I'm a photographer. I'm an instructional designer at Oklahoma State University. I live in Stillwater, Oklahoma, a small town, about 50,000 people. Yeah. Not quite enough for a Target, but we have 2.5 Walmarts. I'm a father, and I mention that because it influences a lot of what I photograph. And my wife and I also have a side project we call Stevens Creek Photography, and it's kind of it's the name under which we take photos for clients. So a couple times a year, we'll take photos like senior photos, or if someone has a newborn baby, or just family photos. And that name is Stevens Creek Photography. But other than that, I'm just a guy, got some cameras, some lenses, and I really enjoy taking photos. And the Weekly 50, the project that you mentioned earlier, that's been my ongoing project for the past 6 years now. Wow. Almost the opposite of what Julianne Const does with projects with a clear beginning and end. So that's sort of what I've been doing for the past 6 years, is this weekly photo project, and it's really taught me a lot about taking photos. And
that's good. That's awesome. And that's kind of what I want to talk about, is the genesis of the Weekly 50, because a lot of people may have heard of 365 projects where people give themselves the sort of self-imposed goal of, okay, I'm going to take a photo every single day for the next 365 days. And the result, or the goal of that, is to be putting content out there all the time, and also to be forcing yourself to create photographs, whether you like it or not. But part of the negative of that, as you know, is it becomes an albatross sometimes when life gets in the way of you taking photos. And then now you feel like, you failed because, hey, I was supposed to take a photo every day for 365 days, and I haven't taken a photo in the last 5 days. So now you feel like a failure, and your camera bag is mocking you from the corner over there. So, but you took a different tack at this, right? You took a different sort of take on the 365. Explain the Weekly 50 as it is contrasted with the 365 sort of self-project.
So the numbers are a little misleading. I call my blog Weekly 50. In fact, that's the name of the blog, Weekly 50. And if you go to weekly50.com, that's me. But in kind of a contrast to a 365 project, like you mentioned, that's generally where you take a photo every day, and with the goal of continuing to use your camera and learning to use more. When I was thinking about how to hold myself accountable for taking more photos 6-7 years ago, I didn't have the mental capacity to maintain a 365. I've tried 7-day photo projects. I can't even do that. And so, like, there was a while ago on Facebook, there was this kind of a project that a lot of people were doing. It was 7 days of black and white. And I thought I could do 7 days of black and white. No, I can't. I made it like 3 or 4 days and quit.
Yeah.
So my middle ground was one photo per week instead of one photo per day. And I call my blog Weekly 50 because when I started this project, I had one camera. It was a Nikon D200. So it's a super old camera. I think that's probably that came out in 2006. And I had a 50 millimeter lens, which I still use to this day. So I had just that camera and that lens. I didn't even have a kit lens. That was my only lens. And I thought if I post one photo per week with my 50 millimeter lens, then I should just call my blog Weekly 50, as in Weekly 50 millimeter. Now I've kind of branched out. I have more cameras. I take photos with a variety of lenses, but the names, I just keep the name around because I kind of like the name.
And it works. It definitely works. But the other side of that is your driving force for doing this wasn't like, you know what, I'm just gonna, I'm gonna do this repetitive sort of exercise to grow that muscle, right? Mm-hmm. It was more of you wanted to do a repetitive exercise to challenge yourself photographically and learn the art of photography through trying different techniques and that sort of thing. Can you talk about that a little?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So if I think about why I wanted to take more photos, I don't want to document my life. And that's a difference between my Weekly 50 project and some other photo projects. I'm not trying, I don't put pictures of my kids on my blog. I don't put pictures of my breakfast. Generally, I don't think I ever have. My goal for the blog is to it's to force myself to take more photos and to learn more about my gear. And so at the time I had my D200, my 50 millimeter lens, and I thought, I don't know how to use this, but I see all these numbers on here like f1.8, 2.4, 2.8. I see ISO, I see a shutter speed, and when I close down the shutter speed, then my aperture gets wider, and like I didn't know how to use this, and so I thought, well, if I force myself to use this camera on a regular basis and explore the features of this camera, then I will end up learning more about it. And so if I look back at my early photos from the blog, that's exactly what I was doing. I was taking pictures where I was saying, well, what happens if I make that aperture, if I put it in aperture priority mode and I make the number go way down to like 1.8, what does that do to my photos? Mm-hmm. And then I would do the other way. Like, well, what if I do a longer shutter speed? What does that do to my photos? And these are the kind of things that you can watch YouTube videos on this stuff. You can kind of play around with it. But for me, unless I had something to consistently hold myself accountable for using my camera, then it would be one of those like you go to a store and you try on shoes and you're like, oh, that shoe fits great. Put it back on the shelf. Like, well, maybe I'll try it on another time. But you don't really forge a relationship with that shoe unless you actually buy it.
Yeah.
And for me, having this project to continually push myself meant that I forced myself to return to my camera time and time again and learn how to use it. And that's, I see that theme a lot. And with people like me, I'm just a regular guy. I got a 40-hour week job. I got a wife and 2 kids. I'm not a professional photographer, even though we have Stevens Creek Photography on the side. I'm just a guy. And I wanted to learn more about taking photos. And I didn't have time to take a photo class because I have 2 kids.
Yeah.
And at the time, if I go back 6 years ago, that was really my goal, is I need some way to force myself to learn about my camera and continue to use it. And this one photo a week has been the perfect way to do that. And I really think this is something anyone could do. I don't have any special training. I don't have any special software. I just have the photos that I've taken over the hundreds and hundreds of photos over the past 6 years that I have used as a self-improvement, basically. And if I look at the photos I take now versus the photos I took back then in 2013 when I started this, they're way, way better.
And that's the whole point, right? Is to,
Yeah.
you should have a trajectory of improvement, as over the weeks and years and months or whatever that you're doing this. One of the other things that intrigued me about chatting with you about this, Simon, was the idea of you introduced multimedia into the blog posts that you do with each photo. So versus, I'm just going to take a photo, like the 365 example, right? I'm going to take a photo every day and post it, and then on to the next day. You've given yourself a little breathing room, and you do a photo, but then you also do a little text write-up and audio narration to the photo. Talk about that a little bit, because I think that is really cool, that people can hear your voice and your personality and your enthusiasm for a particular photo that you've worked on, versus trying to kind of put your voice into the written word. Tell me about that, the thought process behind doing that.
So when I started this blog, it was just text. And after a little while, I thought, well, I've always wanted to do a podcast. I should make this available as a podcast. And I realized that, much later, it didn't make sense to me why I'm doing an audio podcast for a visual medium. But it forced me to record like supplementary materials, almost like you put in a DVD or a Blu-ray and you have those behind the scenes extra features, and you can hear the director talk about how they made the movie and how they cast it and how they lit it and shot it. And for me, adding audio was a way for me to give a peek behind the curtain a little bit, all with the goal of education. In my current role at Oklahoma State University, I'm instructional designer. I work with professors all across campus to help them improve their teaching. And when I lived in Minnesota, I taught high school for 4 years. And so I've kind of got this bug in my mind about teaching. I really enjoy teaching other people. And I've got a text write-up for every photo on the blog, but I've also got this audio commentary that is really designed to give a richer experience to someone who's looking at the photo. And I'll just spend a couple minutes talking about how I got the photo, what I was thinking, what I did for post-processing. Is it based off a similar photo that I've taken before? And if so, what have I learned since then? And it really is like the director's commentary that you would find on a Blu-ray or a disc at home. Yeah. And my goal with that is partially to crystallize my own thoughts. I find that if I can, what's the saying? Like you don't really know something until you can teach it. Yeah. Yeah. And if I can speak for a couple minutes about a photo, I find that I actually internalize those lessons a little more personally, and then hopefully it's useful to someone else out there. And my blog is never, I don't have any ads on my blog. I don't make money off it. But I hope that people who read it and listen to it would end up learning something about photography themselves. Yeah. Partially through the audio and partially just through the text. And that's fantastic. I mean, that's an exercise in using the medium, right? Because most of us have screens that we can look at and data, and so to display a photo, a two-dimensional photo, and that's it. That's what most people do. If you're lucky, we get a caption or a couple of words or some hashtags. Yeah, but the hashtag. Yep. Yeah, the hashtags. But you're taking it to the next level where you do a little write-up and the audio. I think that's brilliant, because it takes us not only into the mind of the photographer, but the art itself and the challenges that it took to create that photo, and all that. I think that's fantastic. And I'm just so you know, I'm going to steal that idea. I hope you do. And honestly, like, this requires no special software. If you have a Mac, you can open up QuickTime and go to new audio recording and just record an audio, and it's right there. And Windows has programs like that too. Yeah. I would be thrilled if other people kind of adopt the same model, because there's such a low barrier to entry. And I can't prove this, but I have I've been doing a 6-year longitudinal study with an N of 1, and and judging by the data I've gathered, which is just me, I think this is a model that would work well for most people. The idea of one photo a week. And maybe doing a little write-up, maybe doing a little audio. But if anyone wants to learn more about their camera, more about photography, lighting, aperture, shutter speed, one photo a week seems to be the sweet spot.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that.
One of the keys, though, to my blog, and you alluded to this earlier, is I post one photo a week, but I don't take one photo a week. The beauty of using this format as opposed to Instagram, where it's sort of instantaneous, is I publish my blog using WordPress, and WordPress and probably most other blogging platforms out there. I'm not going to endorse WordPress, but others probably do this too. They allow me to schedule posts. And so I can schedule posts weeks or even months in advance. And as we're recording this, like the night we're recording this, if I look at my calendar here, I've got the next 2.5 months of photos scheduled.
Wow.
on my blog, because I was on a trip recently and I got back and I had taken probably 6 photos that of all the photos I took, there were 6 that really stood out to me, and I wanted to use those on Weekly 50. And so I wrote the post, I recorded the audio, I put a clip on, I put the audio on YouTube for my YouTube channel, and I scheduled everything. So for the next 10 Wednesdays, which is when the photos go live, I don't have to worry about, did I take a photo this week? And like you mentioned earlier, oh no, what if I didn't take a photo? No, I'm a terrible person. I'm a failure as a photographer.
Yeah.
Because I've already done that, and I've built in this cushion, and that built-in cushion has made all the difference in the world, because it just removes any sense of stress or urgency. I don't have to get to Tuesday and feel like, oh no, Wednesday is tomorrow and I haven't taken a photo, and like, quick, I better find something to take a photo of and do my Weekly 50 post.
Right. So you can give it more thought. And, and part of that is, like you alluded to, is just taking the pressure off of yourself versus, we're all busy. We all have a lot of stressors in our lives. And to add another one with photography kind of is contrary to the whole idea of photography, that it's something that you enjoy doing. But I think you solve that very elegantly by using pre-published posts or scheduled posts where you're literally working in the future. Like you say, you're a couple of months out now,
yeah.
Right? So you're banking, you're putting content in the bank and withdrawing a couple months from now versus living check to check, which is what 365 photographers do, right? So it's got to feel
exactly
pretty good.
Right. It feels great. I mean, it's such a good feeling. I woke up this morning and I didn't even know what photo I had posted. We're recording this on a Wednesday evening. I checked my email and I was like, oh, hey, I remember taking that photo. I wonder what I said about it. and it's really neat to have that experience of scheduling the posts in advance. When I tried to do a 365, and for the record, if you're the type of person who really enjoys that type of accountability, where you want to do a photo a day for a year or a month or whatever, I think that's fantastic. My bottom line is I want people to use their cameras and learn more about their cameras and improve as photographers. That's all I'm doing this for. And if a 365 is how you do that, then you do that, and that's great. Jenny Stein, a photographer out of Philadelphia, she has a show called The Family Photographer, and she's really big on 365 projects, and I think that's awesome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I can't do that.
Yeah, I think it depends on the person, right? I think some people are sort of cut out to do that 365
yeah, there you go.
cadence.
Cut out for it,
yeah, they're cut out for that cadence. Other people are weekly, and I think that the takeaway from this is to get, or like Julianne Koss, like hers aren't really necessarily time based, but they're finite. And when the interview that I did with her, as we record this, hasn't published yet, but when she and I were talking, she's She was saying that she begins with the end in mind. So she knows that she knows exactly how many photos she needs for a particular topic. She researches that topic. She knows what format, square, 16 by 9, whatever those photos are going to be and what size they're going to be. All these decisions are made before she takes the first photo. And then she basically goes in and fills in the blanks for that particular project. And the other piece of it is she has multiple projects going on at one time. So there's a lot of latitude in there for different kinds of projects. I think part of the big takeaway from this conversation is to do a project, right? And not just say, hey, I'm a photographer and I like taking pictures of skies, and then every now and then you go take a picture of a sky or something. You're going to burn out relatively quickly. Before we end this, I want to transition into, so you've been doing this for 6 years, you said, right? So
yeah, 6 years.
How are you giving yourself the topics for these photos? Are you, is it just serendipity? Like, I think I want to learn about f-stops today. So you do that, or, how do you self-task yourself?
That's a good question. What I kind of do, if you look back on the photos, they kind of go in these waves. For instance, for one, this might sound silly, but I bike to work and I work on a college campus. And so often I'll have my camera with me on the way to work and I'll see something on my 2-mile bike commute. And it might be a little stream. It might be a shopping cart. It might be a sunrise. And I'll just stop and take a photo. And it's not a specific topic, but it's something that I just happen to notice. And if anyone out there is thinking about doing something like this, you don't even need a DSLR. You can use your iPhone or Android phone for this. The point is to use your camera and learn more about photography. But sometimes I'll take a specific angle, like I got a set of close-up filters, which basically turn any lens into a macro lens. So you can get these super cool shots of like insects and office supplies, paper clips and pencils.
Your keyboard?
Keyboard. And you can screw these on. They're like $30 for a set of these. They're super cheap. So I got to see these close-up filters, and for the next like 2 months, all I did was literally explore close-up filters. And so it's an interesting story. I spent, I think summer 2015 or 2016, I got these close-up filters. And for a long time on Weekly 50, I was using these close-ups, and they come in like +1, +2, +4, +10 based on how much they magnify. Mm-hmm. And so I was learning all about these close-up filters and learning that if I use a +10, I can get really close to something, but then the depth of field is super shallow.
Right.
And so I got to be careful. And I can't use a wide aperture. I got to shoot it like f8. Otherwise, the depth of field is just out of control. And I started to learn more about these close-up filters. And I knew I was a lot more comfortable using these because, like 100%, because of Weekly 50. Fast forward to January of 2019, a friend of mine had a new baby, and she said, will you take some photos? So I said, sure. Went over to her house. Because of Weekly 50, and I mean this directly because of Weekly 50, I knew where to look for lighting. I knew where to position the baby. I knew what to do for what gear to bring, which I shot the whole thing with my 50 millimeter lens.
Of course.
And I wanted to get some shots of the fingernail, like the baby's little hand holding mama's finger, and you get those really close up shots. And 100% of that experience of getting those photos of the fingernails was due to the close-up filters and experimenting with those on my Weekly 50 blog. So I knew going into this shoot, I was going to use my +4 close-up filter. I was going to need a high ISO because I was going to have to shoot at a smaller aperture of about f5.6.
Yeah.
So going into this baby shoot, because I had done so much on Weekly 50 with my close-up filters, just like flower petals and office supplies, I knew what to do going into this infant photo shoot. And there's a lot of instances like that over the years where I can specifically point to an experience I did on the blog and how and then look at later and how that has made a demonstrable improvement in my photography. And I never see those coming, but it's so cool to have that happen where just because of my continual use of my camera and my gear, I've improved on my photography, and I can demonstrate that in the photos I take now. So it's really been cool to see that. I know there's a TWiP guest, frequent TWiP guest, Don Komarechka.
Yeah, Don,
His niche is snowflakes. And he has like the most amazing photos in the world of snowflakes. And I thought, well, there's a topic for Weekly 50. If only I lived in a place that got snow.
I know, absolutely. Well, I'm sure he would rather have less snow, but no, that is fantastic. I mean, the idea is just, it's inspiring talking to you about this, because the part of what you're saying, it sounds like, is echoing what they say about the 10,000 hour rule, right? Where if you do anything for 10,000 hours, then, or it takes 10,000 hours to be competent at something. But if you apply that to photography, it's like, well, 10,000 hours is just wandering around aimlessly does not sound fun. But if you put yourself on a trajectory and a vector with some thrust, then, and that vector and thrust
Air Force background talk.
That is Air Force coming in, or nerd. It could be Star Trek. I don't know. But
no, and you're exactly right about that. And what I see happen with a lot of photo projects is there isn't a clear trajectory, and there isn't a thrust behind it. And so often, this is not, I don't mean this to cast dispersions on anyone who's doing a project, because any learning experience is good. Mm-hmm. But often the pattern I see is someone will get really excited. They'll get a new camera, new lens, or new iPhone, and they'll take a bunch of photos, but they won't have a trajectory. And so pretty soon, what happens is it ends up as photos of your meals and photos of your kids. Mm-hmm. And if that's you, like if that works for you, then do that. But for me, the trajectory is always this backdrop of, how can I learn more about my camera? And sometimes I'll do just that. I'll take my camera out and I'll think, well, I haven't done a sunrise photo in a while. I should take a sunrise photo. Mm-hmm. Or I haven't played around with like slow curtain shutter, or long, rear curtain shutter, or front curtain shutter. Or maybe I'll just take my tripod out and set my camera out in the street and just play around with shutter speeds as traffic's going by. And the backdrop for me isn't to document my life. It's to learn about photography, and to keep me coming back to that idea that I need to use my camera if I want to learn more about it.
Yeah. And that's the key, right? That is the huge key.
It really is.
Is just using that camera. A lot of people have that, and we're all guilty of it, right? You'll get really excited about a piece of new gear or lens or a drone or whatever, and then crickets, right? This is a way to kill those crickets. Kill the crickets. We need a T-shirt that says "Kill the crickets," right?
There you go. Kill the crickets.
Kill the crickets.
I love it.
Well, so, I mean, what's next for the Weekly 50? Are you going to continue on? Are you going to make any changes to it, or what's the vector that you're going in?
That's a good question. Again, so I mentioned earlier, I recently put everything on YouTube, and I went back and I put every photo and the audio commentary on YouTube, and that was kind of a process. But I want to get more people interested in doing this sort of thing. And so I'm the type of person who I'll go to a particular YouTube channel and just click play, and then whatever it says is like up next, I'll just let it play. And so I'm hoping that someone might go to the YouTube channel and watch several of these Weekly 50 photos, and then learn more about photography and maybe be inspired to start their own. In terms of me, I have no plans to quit and no plans to really change a lot.
Good.
And a big part of that is this model for me has to be sustainable. I have to slot this in with my wife, my kids, my job, all my other obligations, and I can't take on so much that it's going to end up being an albatross, like you mentioned. I also want to learn more about post-processing, and I went for a while where I shot exclusively in RAW, everything in RAW, even pictures of my kids just playing in the street. And And now I've backed off. I shoot most of my photos with my Fuji X100F in JPEG because the classic Chrome JPEGs are so good.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to learn more about what I can do with those JPEGs in terms of post-processing. I have Lightroom, I have Photoshop, but I don't know that I'm really using them to the extent that I could. And so what I'll probably end up doing later this year, as I continue to do Weekly 50, is that will then be my vector. Instead of what type of photos can I take, how can I play around with dynamic range? How can I play around with white balance? Like when I'm shooting JPEGs, you have to set your white balance. So how can I play around with that? What are some different ways I can use white balance in my camera?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I could just shoot in RAW, but I want to challenge myself to do something with JPEG instead. So for me, it always falls under that umbrella of how can I learn more, or what more can I learn about photography?
Yeah.
And no special skills are required to do any of this, which is why I think it's the type of project that anyone could really do and benefit from.
Yeah, I agree. But the last question I'll throw at you, this is a curveball, so get ready, brace yourself. No,
Here we go.
It's not really a curveball. But so you've been doing this for 6 years. You're going to continue. What does the end game look like, or is the journey the destination? You know, is Simon Ringsmuth going to become a professional photographer, and your holy grail is to be shooting in a New York studio with Andy Leibovitz, or are you just happy like continuing and adding a brick to the wall every week?
So my end game, my long game actually is when I retire. I'm 30. I turn 39 next week. When I retire, I want to have built up enough photography clients and experience that I can ease into that. And I'm talking like 20, 25 years from now.
Yeah.
So that's a long game. But this is something my wife and I seriously talk about, where our kids are in elementary school, and over time, we'd like to build up enough word of mouth where when they're in high school, people are coming to us for their senior photos on a regular basis. Mm-hmm. And then our kids won't need as much of our attention daily. And we can take some of the time that we spend kind of micromanaging our kids because they're so young. We won't need that as much, but we still want to be involved in their lives, and photography would hopefully be a good way to do that. And having Weekly 50 is a way for me to continue to sustain that interest.
Sure.
Because we'll go through dry spells where I don't get any clients, which is fine because that's not the point of Stevens Creek photography. I make like $300 a year off that. Mm-hmm. But Weekly 50 keeps my photography skills sharpened. And if I've been maintaining that, just like the photo of the infant, then I'm sort of ready to meet that challenge of taking on more clients and doing more actual paid work.
Yeah, you're keeping keeping that blade nice and sharp so that whenever you need it, you can use it. Well, I sort of buried the lead here in terms of where people can go to see this body of work that you're building. So fill us in on that. If people want to see the Weekly 50, where are you on? Where's the blog located, and what's the name of the YouTube channel and all that stuff? So I'm at weekly50.com, and it's the word 50, not the number 50. But that's my blog, and that's where you can find the most. You'll get all the text right up, and you'll get the photo and the audio commentary. From that, there's a link to go to YouTube. My YouTube channel is just Weekly 50. So I suppose if you Googled YouTube Weekly 50, you'd find that. There's also all my photos are hosted on Flickr, actually. Nice. And if you talk about long term, maybe one day if I get enough, my goal is not YouTube subscribers, but if I accidentally get enough YouTube subscribers, then I would like to get a Flickr Pro membership and use YouTube income to pay for Flickr Pro. There you go. So that's a goal, right? I can do that. Yeah, I think that's an attainable goal there. And so my photos are on Flickr because it's a great way. You actually interviewed the gentleman from Smug Mug. Mm-hmm. Yeah, not too long Alistair, ago. Yeah. And I've been with Flickr for 10 years. Flickr's awesome. I hope they never go away. And it sounds like they're just only going to get better now that Smug Mug bought them. Absolutely.
And my photos are on Flickr as well. So anything on Weekly 50 is just pulling from my Flickr, and it's just using the embed code from Flickr. And that helps with bandwidth on my blog too. So I don't have to get a bill from my blogging provider.
Yeah, trust me, I know all about that.
I think Flickr can pay for that.
I know. It's okay, right? It's a catch-22 having a large amount of traffic and then paying for that traffic, right?
Right.
So,
Oh, now I got to pay for it.
yeah.
I want to mention one other thing that regarding the way in which Weekly 50 has helped me. And I'll try to make this quick. On a trip to Nebraska recently, I was driving along on this back roads highway. No one else was there, and I saw the sun was setting, and I thought, I'm going to pull over and take a picture of that sunset. And I just sat there for about 15, 20 minutes watching the sunset and just taking it all in. And I specifically had Weekly 50 in mind, and I thought, I'm going to get a really good photo for my blog. And as a result, I got to experience a sunset, a Midwestern winter sunset, like I haven't sat through in years, probably decades.
Wow.
And it was so cool that I forced myself to do that. And I would have never done that if it weren't for Weekly 50. And I can look back at previous sunset photos I've taken and put on the blog. And the one I took earlier in January, which I think goes live on March 27th, I can tell you it's the best sunset photo I've ever taken, but it's probably not the best sunset photo I will ever take because there's always more sunset photos to take.
Yeah.
And so having the blog has allowed me to have some experiences that I would never have had otherwise, just because it's in the back of my mind. And I'll think, wait a second, I got to pull my bike over and take a picture of this boom box on the side of the road because I've got Weekly 50. So it's been really cool to have that. And I hope other people would have that as well if they start a similar project.
No, I love it. Yeah, it gives you a reason. Right.
Yeah.
A reason for your photography versus, okay, I'm going to put it on Instagram and get a couple thumbs up. You've added a couple of layers to that where it's education, it's inspiration, and it's an ongoing project. So I think it's brilliant. Kudos, man. Congratulations on doing that. I think it's fantastic. Like I said, I'm stealing it from you.
I hope you do. I would love to see it.
I will credit you, but I am going to do this. I'm doing a weekly something. I don't know what it's going to be yet.
Forward to it.
Yeah, this is great. So, Simon Ringsmuth, thank you so much for coming on, man. I appreciate your time. I'm inspired, and I'm excited to get started. So, we'll leave it there. So you have a good evening, and I'm looking forward to your next posts on the Weekly 50.
Thank you. I appreciate being on, Frederick. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Okay, take care, Simon.
Take care.
This is TWiP.